Welcome back, everybody, to the Chicago Football Show. And as you can see, we have a three-box now. It's me and Carmen Vitale and special guest, ESPN NFL analyst. You can see her on NFL Live. Anywhere that there's a television or an internet browser, Mina is probably on it. And I'm trying not to nerd out, but she's my favorite NFL analyst in the game. So I'm super excited about this one. Mina, thank you so much for joining the show. And let's just start off with a kind of big picture Chicago Bears question. There's such a honeymoon period in the city about Ben Johnson, and they're so excited, and I think that they're ready for a worst to first. Can you kind of give some perspective and maybe some realism to what is, what is ahead of them going in and battling the NFC North?
Yeah, I think worst to first is a little optimistic given how difficult the division was. If the Bears were in the NFC South, I'd say, you know what? Yeah, maybe. Let's do it. But I think the NFC North is just such a bloodbath. That said, when Carmen and I talked about the division on my podcast, we previewed the NFC North. We both agreed that while, the Lions and the Packers would seem to be on top, we really could see it shaking out anyway. It's just going to be very competitive. The Vikings are such a high variance team. Chicago, so much it hinges on the improvement of the young quarterback. But I am very optimistic about the Bears, separate from their record and playoff contention, purely because I like the pieces they added. I like the coaching staff a lot. And I like Caleb Williams. I think obviously he had a very challenging rookie season, but I think there was enough there for fans to be excited about year two.
Yeah, and when you look at Caleb Williams last year, the counting stats, he had technically the fifth best season of any Chicago Bears quarterback in history. But you go a little deeper and you look at some of these advanced metrics, and it shows, some of the reasoning behind the 68 sacks that he took and his indecision and some of the scramble drills and stuff like that, there was no sort of rhythm to the offense. And that's something that we've heard Ben Johnson so far this camp say he wants him to do. What did you see from Caleb Williams last year that kind of, gives you hope or optimism, or maybe the opposite as far as kind of working more within structure this year?
I think the first thing that jumped out was that when he played well, and there were stretches, not even just like quarters, but there were, a few games here, there are 2 or 3 stretches where I thought he looked like the number 1 overall pick. You saw the arm talent that is a huge part of why he was drafted where he was. I mean, he can throw the ball to any part of the field. He can do it accurately, although at times, obviously, that wasn't the case. He can play both inside and outside of structure. There are games like, I think the Jacksonville game is one where his time to throw might have been the lowest of any that season. And he was just a machine in that game. The ball was coming out quickly. He was hitting, the middle of the field so well and seeing it well. And then there would be, games where it felt like he didn't trust what he was seeing, and it led to inaccuracy, holding onto the football. So I think really what you just need is more consistency. You need those good moments to be more than just a half or a couple of games. And really you need to see confidence from him in the structure of the offense.
Well, let's stick with Caleb Williams for at least one more question and talk about this partnership with head coach Ben Johnson. He obviously has so much street cred from his time with the Lions, but he's asking Caleb Williams to do a bunch of different things from a technical and fundamental standpoint. But I also think, this Ben Johnson has a real possibility of bringing out the best in Caleb Williams. What do you think of this partnership, and how much patience should this partnership be afforded?
Yeah, I'm really interested in seeing what it looks like on the field, because I'm interested in seeing, there's a lot, but I'm primarily interested in seeing how Ben Johnson evolves his offense, the one we saw in Detroit, to perhaps be more accommodating of Caleb Williams' skill set. I think there'll obviously be some continuity, but he's not going to put Caleb, it's not going to be like how it was with Jared Goff, where he was under center, maybe more than any quarterback in the NFL. It was a very play-action offense, targeting the middle of the field, of course, not a very high average depth of target. I think there'll be elements of that, but Caleb Williams is not Jared Goff. He is not automatic from inside the pocket, but then he also brings plus ability outside the pocket, and I think arms talent that exceeds Goff in terms of his ceiling. And so I think it's going to be fascinating to see how that schematic marriage plays out. And I say plays out because there does need to be some patience. Chicago has Minnesota week 1. We're going to be there for NFL Live. That is a really challenging defensive matchup. Maybe it'll look great, but I would hope that Bears fans have a little bit of patience, because that's, one of the most difficult matchups you can get on the entire NFL, quite frankly, just in terms of everything that Brian Flores throws at you with that defense. And of course, that new look interior offensive line is going to be tested because Minnesota did also add some bodies up front.
Yeah, and the other thing too, we talk a lot about Caleb Williams adjusting to this offense and Ben Johnson kind of creating this offense for Caleb Williams, or at least with Caleb Williams in mind, but he also has an entirely different cast of skill players on this offense, and he doesn't necessarily have the horses in the backfield, as you and I talked about, Mina, when I was on your show. But so much of that is so indicative of a Ben Johnson offense, the run game and kind of the marriage between the run game and the passing game. But Chicago just doesn't have those horses necessarily right now. What do you see out of this skill position group as far as the depth at receiver? We had Luther Burden back at practice today in pads, which was a good sign. What can we kind of expect, do you think, out of what Ben Johnson's been able to create, given that he does not have the same cast?
Yeah, I saw some social media posts about Ben Johnson kind of giving Luther Burden a hard time, but maybe I was fake news. You guys can tell me if I was misled on that regard. He was a player in college who was very, very talented, but also I think inconsistent, and you could see some growing pains there. You make a great point about the backs. The hope is that the investment in the interior of the offensive line will lift the run game, even though they have the same running backs back there. But I think it's not going to be the same. I talked about sort of the under center aspect where Jared Goff was throwing. This is not an offense that says, okay, cool, it's 3rd and 6. We're going to run the ball to get to 4th down. It's just, I don't think that, especially early on, they can lean on the run game to the extent that Detroit did. But you could argue they have other skilled players who are better than the ones in similar positions at Detroit. I mean, this is a very good, I'm not saying they have anyone better than Amon-Ra St. Brown. But, top to bottom, this is a very talented and interesting group of wide receivers who I think, and this is where you're going to see some difference from Detroit, can win more on the perimeter, right? You're talking about DJ Moore or Dunze, for example, which is very different from Detroit, which is built to win over the middle of the field. So I think Ben has to figure out, okay, it's not Rome Odunze or Luther Burden or DJ Moore's in the Amon-Ra St. Brown role. It's what are the right roles for these guys. The tight end group is also extremely exciting. Obviously, Colston Loveland being their first overall draft pick, pairing him with Cole Kmet. I think it'll be interesting to me early on to see the balance between 11 versus 12 personnel. Some of that I think will have to do with Burden and how good they feel about him. But I think if they do lean heavily into 12, this could be a very good group with DJ Moore, Rome Odunze, and those tight ends, and I wouldn't be surprised if we see a lot of that.
Yeah, that was actually kind of leading into my next question there, is that when they're in that kind of 12 personnel package, and they can really go 4 wide on you if they want, and it seems like that package isn't used a ton, but I think that Ben Johnson can really use it impactfully when he chooses. Having tight ends like that, what kind of variance does that offer, and what type of creativity does that give Ben?
I think actually Loveland, we talked about not wanting to try to map too hard the players onto Detroit. The receivers are very different. I actually think Loveland and Sam Laporta in Detroit do have a lot of similarities. Loveland's a very complete receiver who can win, I would say, multiple parts of the field. He can win vertically. He can get you yards after the catch and the short stuff. He's got fantastic hands. I saw a willing blocker who I think can get better in the NFL. So, the way I see it, there's no reason for him to leave the field very much if he lives up to everything he was in college. And then, the pairing of him, Kmet, I think, you get into those groups, you force defenses to go a little bit heavier, you play action them off of that. These are all things that Ben Johnson measures in. So I'm excited to see that pairing on the field for sure.
I want to switch a little bit to the other side of the ball that we have not talked about yet, because it is an incredibly aggressive scheme that Dennis Allen runs. And Dennis Allen coming in here, Ben Johnson, we've heard him talk about this week how he's leaning on these coaches that have experience. Dennis Allen has all the experience you want out of a defensive coordinator, having the head coach experience, and then having the physicality experience to really push these guys to a limit that he's comfortable with because he's seen it before. I'm really interested to see kind of with the additions up front what this defense is going to look like. I would love to hear just kind of what your impression of Dennis Allen's defense have been back when he was with, the Saints, but then how that can translate here in Chicago and how physical they can be now with those additions up front.
Yeah, Carmen, we talked about this on my NFC North pod. I loved this hire. I think the combination of the young offensive wonderkin coach with the older, experienced defensive coordinator is a proven formula. I also think Dennis Allen, for whatever you think of him as a head coach, has been one of the better defensive coaches in football over the last 5-10 years or so. And you're right, there is going to be a schematic shift. We talked about this as well. I do expect them to play more man coverage, something that when the Bears did do it last year, they were actually way better at than playing zone. Some of that is situational, of course, but I do think they have the players in the secondary and cornerback room in particular to pull that off. Up front is actually probably where my bigger concern is with this defense, the pass rush. Montez Sweat, I believe, was playing, hurt last year. So one hopes that if he's healthier, he can bring more to the table in that regard. I know they brought in Odingbo as well. But that was something I kind of hoped that they would address a little bit more this offseason and draft. And, if they're going to play as much man coverage as they are, I think that's probably where I'm curious to see how able, they are to get pressure with and without blitzing.
All right, now I'm going to give you one out of left field because I have to. X-Men. I know that you're, comics, you're into it. If you had to assign an X-Men to every quarterback in the NFC North,
oh gosh,
how would you do it?
Okay, well, I'll go JJ McCarthy Wolverine because he is a Wolverine and he's coming off of the injury. Although he is nothing like Wolverine in his personality, but it's just too easy to map that one onto that.
I see what you did there.
Jared Goff would be Cyclops because, he's kind of a little bit more traditional pocket passer, kind of like stands tall, but is deadly accurate with the lasers. Caleb. I'll go, well, Wolverine would be good for Caleb too. I do like him a lot. I'll go Jean Grey for Caleb because she is so talented, but was a bit erratic, perhaps. But if you can harness that power, she's like the most powerful X-Men, I believe. Yep. And finally, Jordan Love. We'll go Storm. Again, very powerful. Very talented, has leadership qualities, but you got to see a little bit more consistency as well.
I really like that Jean Grey comparison. I mean, it totally makes sense. Super talented, can go absolutely like nuclear, but could also cause you some problems and destroy humanity. I think that was fun, as was this conversation. Mina Kimes from ESPN, thank you so much for the time. Appreciate you joining the Chicago Football Show.
Thanks for having me, guys.